6 days that transformed history. This week, on Wednesday, the 5th of June 2024, Israel and much of the Jewish community worldwide commemorated the 57th anniversary of the Six-Day War of 1967. A war that dramatically altered the borders and the political landscape of the whole of the Middle East. The day of commemoration is called in Hebrew Yom Yerushalayim, or the Day of Jerusalem. For most Israelis, the overwhelming victory that occurred transformed the whole outlook of Israel and returned the sovereignty of East Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, the Gaza Strip and the Golan Heights to the people of Israel. They even took control of the Sinai Peninsula, having wrested control from Egypt. By contrast, the 10 Arab nations that surrounded Israel meant for them a crushing military and reputational defeat. The war also impacted on the political landscape of the whole Arab world. Further, the Six-Day War not only changed the political boundaries, but it also transformed the religious tide of the time in a way that reverberated right round the rest of the world. Also, on the religious front, the war brought forth the modern Messianic community that had been progressively developing over the previous 150 years, since 1817. Because religion is often considered as the force that drives conflict, we need to consider what exactly religious changes occurred in the Six-Day War, and how they impacted on Israel and the whole of the Middle East. Why were the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all so severely impacted by the outcome of that Six-Day War? All three religions were impacted in totally different ways because of the changing political dynamics. Firstly, the world began to see a slow decline in Christianity, which impacted on its influence over Israel and, of course, throughout the rest of the world. Secondly, Islam has been on a rapid rise both in the Middle East and many other parts of the Western world, and has mirrored the steady decline of Christianity. Thirdly, the religious Zionism came out of the shadows and began to manifest itself in the form of the settler movement. It has progressively become a dominant force that has shaped the modern state of Israel, and more recently, particularly in the Knesset. A great deal more could be said about each of these three religious systems and how each has transformed itself over the last 57 years. But rather than spending time looking at the details of how each one developed, I want to explore the scriptures and show that not only is the timing of the Six-Day War not an accident of history, but also that the battles were not won by the might of the IDF. I want to show how the Six-Day War was very significant in the sovereign plan of God, and that the swift victory only happened because the hand of Yahweh was over his people Israel. His angelic army fought alongside the soldiers of the IDF. So turning to the scriptures, we see that the events that occurred in June 1967, and particularly in relationship to East Jerusalem, and more particularly the Temple Mount, was foretold by Yeshua in Luke chapter 21, where he was speaking about the pending destruction of the Second Temple. The people around him were remarking about the beauty of the temple, about its stonework and the decorations, but he brought them down to earth, telling them that the time was coming when it would be totally destroyed. But he did not give them any indication when that was going to occur. Was he deliberately keeping them in the dark about the timing of the pending destruction? The answer is an emphatic no, because he had given them the answers through the prophets many centuries earlier. If they knew the words of the prophets, and particularly the words of Daniel, in relationship to the temple, they would have known when to expect that destruction to occur. In that same chapter of Luke, Yeshua goes on to tell the people that following the destruction, they would be led away into an exile among the Goyim, or the Gentile nations. Then, in the very same verse, he tells them that the Goyim, the time of the Goyim, would actually end. But yet again, he does not say when that end would occur. Was he keeping the information to himself? No, because at that time they also could know exactly when it was going to occur through the prophet Daniel. So looking a little closer at those words of Yeshua in Luke chapter 21 verse 6, we see he says, "The time is coming when what you see here will be totally destroyed. Not a single stone will be left standing." Needless to say, they wanted to know exactly when this was going to occur by saying, "Rabbi, if this is so, when will these events take place? And what is the sign that they are about to happen?" Yeshua answered to the Torah teachers and the Judean authorities. He never gave them a direct answer because the community leaders should have known well what was to be expected. They had the words of Daniel. They had had them for many centuries. The words Yeshua spoke in Luke chapter 21 verses 20 through 23, he said, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you are to understand that she is about to be destroyed. Those in Yehuda must escape to the hills. Those in the city must get out, and those in the country must not enter it. For these are the days of vengeance, when everything that has been written in Tanakh will come true." What a terrible time it will be for a pregnant woman and a nursing mother, for there will be great distress in the land and judgment on the people. Okay, that's what will happen. But when will the temple be destroyed? And what would be the future? What would the future bring? That's when he tells them in verse 24 what it means. "Some will fall by the edge of the sword, and others will be carried away into the countries of the Goyim. And Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Goyim until the Goyim have run its course." So how long would that exile last? And who are the Goyim? And who are the ones that are going to run their course? Yeshua does not say. So what do we find in the words of Daniel's prophecy? What does Daniel tell us? Firstly, about the timing of the destruction of the temple. And then, what does he say about the age of the Goyim? Starting with the destruction, we find the answer in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, where he says, 70 weeks of years have been decreed for your people and for the holy city, for putting an end to transgressions, for making an end of sin, for forgiving iniquity, for bringing everlasting justice, for setting a seal on the vision and prophet, and for anointing the especially holy place. Now the 70 weeks of years is always accepted as 490 years. But indeed, we need to understand a definitive start date. That is provided in verse 1 of that same chapter, where we are told that he was given the vision in the first year of Daravesh, the son of Ahasuerus, a Mede by birth, who was made king over the kingdom of the Kasdim. Now that Daravesh was the second Daravesh. He was the son of Ahasuerus. who married Esther, the Jewess, who brought about the scroll of Esther, which tells us all about the story of Purim. His first year of reign was 423 BCE. So by adding 490 years to 223 BCE, we get 67 CE. That is 37 years after the death of Yeshua, which was just 3 years before the destruction of the temple. 67 CE was when the Jewish revolt actually began against the Romans. So if the Torah teachers who were speaking to Yeshua knew their scriptures, they did not need to be told about when the events would occur or when the age of the Goyim would end, because they should have known all these things from the book of Daniel. Again, Daniel gives us an answer. Turning this time to chapter 8, verse 1, we read that after the first vision, it was in the 3rd year of the king of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, that another vision appeared to me, Daniel. In that vision, Daniel is shown the rise of the Greek Empire, which, as we know from latter events that occurred at the time of Hanukkah, that Greek Empire was the one that introduced Hellenism to the world. It was into the Hellenistic diaspora that Yehuda was also thrown after the destruction of the Second Temple. So looking at chapter 8, verse 14, Daniel was told just how long the Goyim, or the Hellenistic domination of Israel, would actually last, where the first angel is speaking to him and saying, 2,300 evenings and mornings, after which the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. So, where did this vision begin? As it relates to the kingdom of Greece, we know that from history that Alexander the Great conquered Israel in 332 BCE. So that is the starting point of the vision. Therefore, from the arrival of Alexander the Great, we can count forward from 332, we can count forward 2,300 years. And the date brings us to 1967 CE. Is that a coincidence or a scriptural reality? We see that Yeshua did not need to give any specific times or dates because they had already been given to Daniel via that angel. As I did an in-depth study on the book of Daniel back in 2017 through a lecture series which I entitled God's GPS for the 21st Century. So we see from Daniel that he was foretelling many things that would apply to this 21st century. So returning to the 6-day war, we see that it was the turning point of history that Yahweh had ordained would occur as part of his sovereign plan. That same war saw the decline of the Hellenistic Christian church. It also saw the rise of Islam as the third Abrahamic religion, which through Sharia law has shown itself to stand in stark contrast with the ever-increasing decadence of the Western Christian world. However, neither Christianity nor Islam are what Yahweh wants, ruling and controlling the Temple Mount of his people. Therefore, even though the defense minister of Israel in 1967, Moshe Dayan, ordered that the Temple Mount be handed back to the control of the Jordanian Waqf, we see that access to the Mount has always been the responsibility of the Israeli police. However, a warning sign has been placed or was placed at the entrance to the Temple Mount by the chief rabbi of Israel, which says, according to Torah law, entering the Temple Mount is strictly forbidden due to the holiness of this site. Even today, access to the site by Israelis and Jews of the diaspora is highly restricted. Was that what Yahweh wanted? Did Yahweh really leave his people unaware when the sovereignty of the greater part of Israel, and more particularly Jerusalem, would be returned to the control of his people? In answer, again, is the resounding no. Yahweh warned his people when the restoration would occur, but they elected again to ignore his words. So when and to whom was the prophetic message given? The message was given to a renowned Jewish mystic who, on his deathbed, received a vision just like Daniel. His name was Judah ben Samuel, a Hasid of Regensburg, who died in 1217 CE. He was a Jewish mystic and founder of the fervent ultra-pious movement in Germany called Hasidim. He was also principal author of the ethical treatise on the Sefer Hasidim, which was published in 1538 and called the Book of the Pious, possibly the most extant document of the medieval Judaism and a major work in Jewish literature. So Samuel was well known and well understood by the rabbis of his time and many that have come since. The vision he received on his deathbed in 1217 CE looked 300 years ahead to a time when the vision would begin. One important feature of his prophecy was that an unbroken series of sequential Yovels, that is, 50-year cycles, as we're told about in Leviticus chapter 25, which would span 500 years or 10 Yovels. Yehuda's vision began with the Ottoman Mamluk War of 1516 to 1517, which saw Eretz Israel become a province of the Ottoman Empire for the next 400 years. That period was followed, of course, by the British Mandate after the end of the First World War, and that continued between 1917 to 1948. That, of course, was followed by the State of Israel under the domination, or parts of Israel, Eretz Israel, particularly East Jerusalem, were under the domination of the UN mandate until the Six-Day War of 1967, when the sovereignty of Jerusalem was finally returned to the people of Yehuda. Judah's vision included yet one more Yovel, which brought the whole of his vision to a climax at the end of a complete visionary cycle. And that year, of course, was 2017. However, we'll consider that last Yovel next week as part of the celebration of Shavuot. So Yehuda ben Samuel set out his vision in a table form. As such, 1517 to 1917, which was a period of 8 Yovels, or 400 years, the Ottoman Empire would dominate Jerusalem. Then from 1917 to 1967, firstly under the mandate of the British, later of course under the State of Israel, and it ended with the IDF taking control of East Jerusalem in the Six-Day War of 1967. Then, in 1967, as a direct result of the Six-Day War, the sovereignty was restored to Yehuda for the first time since 70 CE, when the Second Temple was destroyed. So in 1967 until 2017, just 1 Yovel of 50 years, which was called the period of the Messianic end times, saw a quantum leap forward of the modern Messianic movement, which had begun way back in 1817. And it kept on developing and is still developing. And we'll consider that in more detail next week. In conclusion, we can see from the visions of the prophet Daniel and Yehuda ben Samuel that Yahweh never left his people Israel without a clear indication of certain historical events that would change the history of man. That is why Yeshua did not need to give concise dates of when these events would occur, because he was being questioned by the Torah teachers of his time, and they should have known the words of the prophets. They should have known what Yeshua had given to Daniel so long before. Each Torah teacher should have known and understood the words of Daniel. In the same way, the rabbis in the medieval period, right down to the modern times, should have listened to the words of wisdom given by Yehuda ben Samuel. Then Moshe Dayan may not have been so keen to give that Temple Mount back into the hands of the Jordanian Wak. If they had listened to Yahweh, listened to his scriptures, and listened to his prophet or visionary, they would have had a different way of approaching things. The hatred that had been heaped up over Israel during the last 57 years has been a result of those 6 days which changed the history of the world. Not only was it Israel that was impacted, but all the nations of the world. Through the actions of the UN and the uprising of Islam during the last 57 years, the Western world has gone into an unending decline, and we are now in the post-Christian era. So next week, I want to look at the 50-year cycle mentioned by Yehuda ben Samuel and see just how it has impacted on all 3 religious communities, and all of which claim to be descendants of Avraham Avinu. Shabbat Shalom.